Alright everyone, time for a very interesting and also quite alarming story here. Now, I'm not going to repeat the name of the individual who decided to attack the Las Vegas power grid the other day. Paul Joseph Watson was posting about this actually, and that's how I heard of it. I think that you can understand why this particular power grid attack is not getting a lot of legacy media attention. Yeah, go ahead and read it for yourself. Again, link in the description, archived of course. I warned you about the power grid, bro, literally years ago, and others have as well. We have a very vulnerable electrical grid in the United States where enormous areas are canvassed by relatively little in the way of security around transformer stations, etc. Power plants are vulnerable as well. When you have a centralized system where 500,000, 1 million people are getting power and it can be shut down by one person with a revolver or with a drone, you leave yourself badly open to incredible amounts of damage. Think about it this way. Let's say someone attacks a transformer station, and that transformer station impacts 250,000 or so customers. They're on blackout mode, and it takes a week to repair the transformer and get power back up. What do you have to do in the meantime? Well, unfortunately, all of the electrical equipment there that doesn't have a backup generator, and you're going to be stretching that fucking fuel, by the way, goes down. Whoops, yeah, so people can't necessarily go to work. They can't charge their EVs as applicable. Thankfully, the average person still uses a gas-powered car, which makes sense because they are much better in virtually every way, and they're also actually better for the environment and the economy. Don't get me started on the EV meme grift, because basically, if it has to be propped up by government subsidies, there's probably a reason for that. If it has to be propped up for a very long period of time and yet still can't break even, then that's definitely for a reason. Just saying, solar may have some issues too with its efficiency at the moment, although it is improving. Just took, 40 years of nonstop subsidization to draw even with some of the less efficient energetic methods. However, it does have a role to play. If you want to prevent this sort of shit from happening, where any disgruntled person with a easily available drone that they can literally order online can run it into a transformer, maybe drop a thermite charge on it or something. It's not really that difficult since it's literally just powdered metal. You got a problem. But what if you decentralize the grid? This is what I've argued for. It's like with solar projects. It's a microcosm of the same basic problem. Right now, we're subsidizing Chinese companies to come in and canvass 200-300 acre parcels that could be left fallow. They'd be grasslands, scrubland, maybe hillside, maybe even forests, and literally cutting down trees in order to save the environment. I think there's something screwy. We finance or help finance, or at the very least regulatorily clear the way for foreign-sourced projects using foreign-sourced materials to literally take over U.S. land for energy development, when we could simply subsidize home solar, home wind projects. We could defang the housing authority's ability to block people from making use of this. Half of the solid middle class that probably would like the long-term investment of having a solar array can't put it up because of a housing authority saying it looks ugly. They can't put up a windmill in their backyard. They're on some hillside somewhere in outer Chicago, and they're like, well, we could make a killing with a couple little windmills. All they have to do is peek above the tree line, and we're golden. We've got free electricity, probably generating for the whole block. They can't do it. This helps centralize the grid, which is the point, because then it's more easily controlled. It makes people more government reliant. That's part of the point. But when you centralize, you leave it open to problems. If you manage things more locally, if you devolved the energy grids in the United States to a more localized or even neighborhood level, I realize it's not proper for all purposes. This is mostly for residential purposes more than for, heavy machinery, like industrial purposes. Not going to be able to do this with with the automotive factory so easily. If you take strain off the grid, though, so at the bare minimum, most people will still have power if something like this happens. It still causes disruption, but it's not nearly as much. You save a lot of money. You potentially save goddamn lives. What happens if the electrical system is knocked out and on that particular part of the grid is a kids' cancer hospital with a bunch of kids that have to be in like iron lungs and shit like that because they're so fucked up that they'll die otherwise. A bunch of bubble children. And then all of a sudden the oxygen system to their bubbles no longer works because the generator finally gave out because everyone's competing for limited availability of fuel. Well, now you have a bunch of dead leukemia kids or whatever. How wonderful. All because you were too stubborn to decentralize part of the grid. I've been arguing for that for years. Leave the fallow land alone and develop residential electricity. Have local systems, neighborhood to neighborhood or suburb to suburb. You could set these sorts of things up. You could subsidize it. It'd be cheaper to do so. You probably wouldn't even need to if you got rid of the regulatory burden. How much of the cost of developing anything on your land comes from regulation? All of the paperwork and shit like that and permits. Most of it, in some cases. With solar, it's something like 40% of the overall cost. I looked into it years ago. I'm like, well, I'm starting to make money, back then. I'm like, well, a home solar thing would be kind of cool, get a generator and stuff. And then I looked into the cost. I found the cost of the panels themselves and the installation, it was on the high side, of course, but it was doable. Then you looked at the cost to actually set it up when you took into consideration permits and things like that. Whoops, there it goes. There goes any middle classer putting up one of these arrays unless they have a nice nest egg built up. Think we found the problem. Meanwhile, some random terrorist can decide to terrorize people and it's real goddamn easy. This dude just took his car, smashed through a gate and lit it on fire next to the transformer and did incredible amounts of damage. Thankfully, he targeted one that wasn't actually being used at the time, but it'll still take weeks or months to replace it. Well, imagine if you had a rash. Imagine one really hot summer. Al-Qaeda says, we've learned something from documenting these news stories. Hey, we think that a dozen people could pretty much rip apart the entire U.S. economy. We'll do it right during a heat wave too, so people's AC doesn't work and the grid's already overstretched. It'll make everything go haywire. You'll probably have power stations that are burning to the ground as well because people are overusing the overstretched power resources. Yeah, Lord help you if they ever figure out that this is actually a viable and extremely efficient and cheap way to attack the United States and other Western nations. Because where there's a will, there's a way, and doesn't seem that these places are guarded generally by anything more than a chain link fence. It's concerning. That's about all. Peace out.